Welcome to Show Studio's live panel discussions. In these discussions, experts from all parts of the industry discuss and debate the most important fashion show or fashion week shows of the season. Today, in the midst of Milan Fashion Week, we're going to be discussing Zegna's Autumn-Winter 2022 menswear collection. So if our four panelists could each introduce themselves. Kimberly, why don't we start with you?
Hi, my name's Kimberley Lawton. I'm a bespoke tailor and I have my own company called Lawton.
I'm Daniel Kearns, creative director of Kent and Kerwin for the past 5 years. Also worked for Zegna and I've worked for Cerruti, Gibbs and Hawkes, and Louis Vuitton and other brands over the years.
I'm Iolo. I'm the director of High Fashion Talk, which is a platform for discussing high fashion across all the social medias, basically.
Hi, Josh Peskowitz. I'm a brand consultant and brand investor, and previously was fashion director for a couple of different retailers, as well as the fashion editor of a number of different magazines over the years and websites.
Cool. Okay, so let's get right into it. As we were saying before we went live, a lot of people have been like sharing and discussing this show, which is a little unexpected for a Zegna show. And I'm curious to hear everyone's sort of like first impressions of the collection, but also why you think there's so much excitement about this collection. Iolo, maybe you could start because you have such a engaged community that I think was probably sharing a lot of these images yesterday and into this morning.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think one of the key things that they did do is was it the Zegna thing that was with Fear of God? What's his name?
Mm-hmm.
And that's
Jerry Lorenzo.
Yeah, that's his name. And yeah, that's kind of put it on the map for a lot of, not necessarily our community, but more so sort of people graduating from the hype beast kind of thing. They're into that sort of Fear of God essentials and that kind of thing, and thinking they're graduated from that. And because of that collaboration, now Zegna is on their map. And yeah, I think it does feed that sort of the style that they want, which is very sort of minimal and chic, and clean is probably the adjective that they would use. So yeah, I think they're feeding that kind of audience. So that's probably why it's interesting to them.
Mm-hmm. I mean, there is also like a real feeling, I think, of really classic, super sumptuous sportswear. Josh, I don't know if that's something I feel like you are particularly attuned to, but I wonder if you felt like it really hit that note in a super fresh way.
I think so. And I mean, I've known Alessandro for many years, and he's always, whether he was at Zegna or when he left to start Berluti or when he came back, you know, there was this idea of like, how do you improve the suit? How do you change the suit? How do you make the suit interesting, which is obviously the heritage of the brand. And I think that, you know, as Lolo was saying, like there's this convergence between, you know, what sportswear gravitating towards tailored clothing and tailored clothing gravitating towards sportswear. Like what will happen when they both collide? I think that you see in Zegna and the Fear of God collaboration, sort of bringing that language to a different group last year. Or was it 2 years ago now? Last year, I think. Who can remember in COVID? But anyway, you know, the convergence of those two things, I think, is really well thought out and really well presented here, as well as the sumptuous fabrics, as well as the idea of like these looser silhouettes, which convey comfort, which people are still really interested in. You know, nobody's ready to get like into the tight suits again anytime soon, I don't think. So, you know, grand total, I think, hitting on a lot of different notes, and also being the first sort of big deal show of the season. You know, knowing that nothing really happened at Pittywith and not showing. So Zegna on this first day, a Friday, was the first big show of the year. And so, you know, there's always going to be interest in that as well.
Yeah. I mean, one of the interesting things that you guys are both getting at is that somehow, for reasons that I want to get into, Alessandro has become this sort of like unexpected like change maker in Italian fashion. Like he is working at a pretty conservative house that's really like synonymous with Italian craftsmanship, but is doing these like really unexpected and like super modernist sorts of things. I mean, one of which is the sort of silhouette that you're talking about, Josh, and this what Alessandro called the nuovo abito, like the new suit. So this idea of this chore jacket and this kind of carrot-shaped pant and this really fluid fabric. But before we even get into that, I would love to hear from Kimberley and Daniel, like when we talk about Italian craftsmanship, you know, what is that? Why is that still so important? And what does that mean to a consumer? Because it feels like it's really interesting and important, even to like the kind of younger consumer that Iolo was talking about.
I think that it's Italian craftsmanship has such a huge history, and they've got this amazing catalogue of yarn, of weaving, of textiles that they can look back on and relate to going forwards, and use this amazing archive to push the boundaries and develop every season. So I think Italian craftsmanship is one of the best in the world, and it always will be because of that amazing history and how long it's been going.
Yeah, I think it's in Italy, they've always treated fashion like they do food. I think it comes from the yarn to retail, and they have the same sort of love affair with fashion as they do with food or wine. And I think you see that when you work with Italian people, you visit Italian factories. You know, Zegna is an incredibly successful family business that started with the yarn, started with the fabric in Trevero. And I think they've always held that at the core of their DNA. Alessandro Sartori has been there for a long time now. And I think he's evolved with the whole sort of, you know, fashion and the world of Zegna in parallel. And I think he's really seeing the need now to kind of rethink the DNA of the suit and rethink kind of the next chapter for Zegna within that, within this kind of new generation, that I guess the suit to some extent may be in crisis. And to a new generation, do they need a suit? You know, suit is an option in a wardrobe, like a trench or like a roll neck. It's no longer an essential. And I think, you know, working at Gives, we were talking about, you know, in the bespoke rooms, maybe it's more like a bespoke shirt made in cashmere, or it's a bespoke loose fit trouser made in cashmere that elevates, you know, a president of a company or somebody who wants to invest in looking good. Whereas, you know, the suit maybe becomes the office worker and becomes a uniform, you know, and sort of changes in its kind of viewpoint, and how we view the suit has changed.
Yeah, I mean, that's such a great, that's like something we talk about almost every day at GQ. I mean, what is your sense, like, as designers, what did you make of this kind of new suit, this shape? Like, what can you tell us that maybe, you know, a writer or someone from the commercial side of fashion wouldn't necessarily take note of?
Well, I just think for me, you know, working with different brands and working a lot with China, the suit is not the core sales anymore. Yeah. You know, on Savile Row, we have suit sales, but they are, you know, either ceremonial suits or they're, you know, an old and established customer. So I think that question needs to be addressed. The Italians have always taken apart the suit anyway. When you think about the Napolitan shoulder, you think about Armani in the 80s and 90s, it was always about deconstructing the suit. So in a way, Sartori is kind of continuing that journey and bringing it into a modern age. And obviously the Fear of God collaboration sort of, as he's sort of taken that DNA and made it his own now, and in terms of what Zegna stands for. And I think right from Gildo to, you know, the shop floor, they need to probably rethink that core product that they have, and how can you change, keep those craftsmanship values, but really invested in more casual and contemporary product.
I would agree with Daniel, and I would just add that I think that what's interesting is that even though it seems like Alessandro's really pushing the boundaries with this kind of collection, like I go back to his days at Zegna, and I remember going backstage at one of the shows. It was a fall winter show. Like, I don't remember exactly when it was, but I think it was like 2009, maybe 2010, where I had seen this suit going down the runway where you could see these like white swatches, like sort of opening up between the panels of the suit. And I said, how did you do that? You know, and he showed me the technique that he was using. And it was the way that furriers bound hides together. So there's like a muslin backing between the two because you can't sew directly into them. So he was using that technique to like show the movement of the suit. So, you know, just thinking back to like even then when he was doing Zegna, which was much, much more experimental than the Ermenegildo line at the time, before he even left and then came back and took over everything, like he was already sort of working on like, how do you take a suit and turn it into something else? And there was resistance to it at the time, you know, because the traditional suit was still so much, you know, coveted. It was like the Mad Men kind of time, you know, so people were wearing those skinny suits with little tie bars. And so it wasn't necessarily accepted. And I think that, you know, as much as his vision feels revolutionary now, I think we're all kind of catching up to where he was a decade plus ago.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting to think too, though, that even like in this particular moment, you know, as you're saying, it is like a narrative that he's had for his whole career. It's sort of like, in some ways, it sounds like you're saying like the defining sort of quality of his career. But he's also like super ready to meet the moment. I mean, he coined this now sort of infamous phrase, phygital, which is a combination of physical and digital show and a way of sort of, you know, creating like a compelling video for Fashion Week when, of course, we all couldn't attend physical shows. And actually, he's been, I would say, one of the few designers who's been really successful at doing this. Like, I mean, there are still sort of striking moments that I remember from past seasons' digital shows, which I can't necessarily say for lots of other designers. And it's been interesting too to see that like even in this highly like visual sort of editorialized presentation, you can really see the details of the clothing. Mm-hmm. Which I think is something that, you know, some designers have sort of skewed more conceptual, and in this instance you can really see like what he's doing with the cuffs and what he's doing with the shoulders, and even like the shapes of those kind of cinched anoraks has been really interesting. And I think in a way, that's part of what makes this so shareable on social media. I mean, Iolo, I wonder if you have any sort of perspective about, you know, how is it that a show ends up getting shared or in a way going viral among like the high fashion talk community or other sort of digital fashion communities?
Yeah, it's interesting. What a show tries to do when it's physical is to transform you into the world where you think these clothes exist, and that can be sort of another land or a sort of another time, and I think they've sort of distilled that and done it with a video and actually taken the clothes to another place. It's super interesting that this season that they took it to a mountain, seeing how popular that sort of gorp core and the sort of outdoors vibe is within menswear across the board now, with the Arc'teryx literally being all across everybody's social media feeds. Yeah, it kind of resonates with people, something that they recognize and that they aspire to. It's kind of aspirational now to actually have time to go out to the mountain or go fishing, or you just have to sort of talk to like guys like the Perroking Pod. They literally aspire to have fashion to go fishing. They'll ask, like, one of them asked like the guys at Needles, are these waders, like, would they be suitable to go in the river? And of course the Needles staff was like, what the fuck? But yeah, that's what people think about now. And I think showing the clothes in that sort of setting is really smart. The other thing is these sort of camera tricks, which of course we see all the time on TikTok. It's all these transitions, these sort of flips and sort of turning the camera and getting interesting angles that makes it visually appealing. I think to a lot of fashion people that we kind of over that, but to a lot of people who maybe don't work with sort of images all the time, or who don't create these images, it's really mind-bending how they can do this, especially taking, for example, I don't know if you've seen all these people that do adverts in their bedrooms for 7-Up or for very small products. They'll do these crazy sort of highly produced, like there'll be like a flip and a spray of water and like a lime that splits in half. Those things fascinate people. And I think they've really tapped into that. And whoever does the production of the DOP on this video is really on the ball with that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if this was intentional or not, but I could definitely see TikTok picking up on the voguing ninjas that were sort of like a quarter of the way or 3/4 of the way through the show. Josh, did you attend the sort of digital event that was held in Milan?
I did not. I was
Okay.
When COVID protocols changed, I ended up watching it online just like everybody else, but I'm gonna go see the close. But I do think that it was very successful in terms of conveying, as you said, as you both said, I thought it was really successful in conveying the sumptuous of the materials, the details. It's something that's really difficult to do online. You know, I started attending Fashion Week in Milan and Paris with style.com when, you know, it was first transitioning from just like people going to shows who needed to see the clothes to pull them or buy them later to it being something that was more of a cultural phenomenon. And it was always like, you lost something, you know, you lost something during that translation to just pictures. You lost the mood, you lost the feeling of being in the room. And I think that progressively things have gotten more focused on the digital. And as with everything else, COVID has accelerated that. And you're right, this is a really successful sort of version of that. And when you think about how difficult it is to convey how, and Zegna is a luxury brand, so let's say how expensive things can feel, and when you touch them in a digital realm, like whether it's for a retail or whether it's for an editorial purpose, it is a challenge. And I, you know, we're all still figuring it out, but this is a really great example of it.
Yeah, Kimberly, I'd be so curious to hear how you feel like this new emphasis on digital, both, you know, because of the pandemic, but also sort of, as Josh was saying, like just over the past decade, like how has that affected tailored clothing, do you think?
I think it's bringing Savile Row back a little bit, and this attention to detail that the audience is having now, and they want to see the craft. They want to see how meticulous you are and how many stitches you put in per the suit, and they want to see that really behind the scenes aspect of it that they haven't seen as much of it before, because now everyone's been locked inside. What other content can you do than show the insides of the suit and show how these wonderful things have been created? And I think that's been it's been great for younger tailors to showcase what they can do, because they're a little bit more on it than the older houses, to showcase how things are made and how they do make them, which I think has been great to come from COVID for sure.
Mm-hmm. Daniel, do you have sort of a perspective on that as well?
Yeah, I think obviously COVID has definitely changed people's perspective, sort of working from home, dressing from home, but then also, you know, I think we are talking about luxury menswear and attention to detail. And as Josh said about trying to convey that digitally, I think is so important. And I think probably some people are realizing going back to conventional catwalk at the moment, especially with COVID restrictions, et cetera, with travel, it's limiting. And I think having this mixed digital and life, you know, real-time event is probably a really good solution to that. You know, I think this conveys a message to a much wider audience. And I think brands are obviously considering that coming out of COVID as well. How can they really reach the end consumer more with their new season ideas and get that sort of message across to people? I think, you know, that's really important for a brand like Zegna with so many stores worldwide. They need to speak to the end consumer and not just the front row.
Mm-hmm. Well, sorry, go ahead, Kimberly.
I was just going to say that I think the way it was shot was beautiful, like the color combinations of having the white suits on the white snow, the like ochre suits on the ochre background, and then having those pops on top. It was really beautiful. And the almost like camouflaging of the outfits with the surroundings that they're obviously inspired by, it was really beautiful to watch, really nice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it does in that way, it feels like luxurious, like simply the choreography and the cinematography of it. It feels like, you know, you're sort of lingering over these images and details and these sort of, I guess landscapes and that sort of thing. So it also felt, spiritually like of a piece with the clothing itself. I'm curious to go back to this this moment that we sort of glossed over at the beginning, which is the Fear of God collaboration, which it was actually right before the pandemic in early 2020. And that feels like a real watershed moment for Zegna, also for Jerry Lorenzo, but also just in general for menswear. It's something that people tend to bring up a lot when they're talking about tailoring. There's been I wrote a piece a couple of years ago for GQ about this like early 90s Armani renaissance that was like unexpectedly like one of our most popular articles. And I'm curious if like, why did you guys feel that really resonated both with customers, but also just in general with like fashion fans?
I mean, I think it's because it's what people want to wear, ultimately. Yeah. I think it's people want, it's that fine balance between wearing jersey bottoms, but also wearing a very sophisticated cashmere coat. And the way of putting that together in a chic sort of modern way. And I think that feels like a contemporary wardrobe. It doesn't feel too try hard. It feels like sort of modern essentials. And I think we all kind of are looking for that in our wardrobe. So I think, for both brands, that was a kind of a milestone, because I think Fear of God have really moved into that territory where they are doing everything from the cashmere overcoat to the leggings for the gym, the full kind of array of product. And I think, with Zegna as well now, sort of aligning everything from Zegna Sport Z, Zegna Couture, and the Ermenegildo line into one, and sort of showing that complete wardrobe. I think that's a much more contemporary way of dressing. We're all used to shopping online and mixing and matching. And I think that's kind of the new approach for men. And men are more comfortable with that now, I think.
I think it was sort of like a senior thesis statement, it's like you couldn't have made up a better way to describe what was happening across like multiple years in menswear than that Fear of God Zegna collaboration. I mean, thinking about, the mirrors at Jill Sander, former Supreme designer, going and now doing the tailor, but like ultra minimal, the entire monochrome dressing that we see here still, that was part of what they were doing. You think about, that idea of the unsuit, plenty of people were doing that. Kim Jones was doing that, both at LV and then at Dior. Obviously, Virgil, rest in peace, was playing with the idea of the suit when he was at Louis Vuitton as well. Think about people like Massimo Alba creating like that Jata, there's so many different people who were trying to figure out, okay, if guys aren't going to wear a suit and a tie and a collared shirt every day, and I'm sure that, both of our tailored clothing experts on the panel agree that there needs to be like something that replaces that, something that makes a person feel as though they are put together, important, clean, and just presentable, but it doesn't have to feel so stuffy. And as people, and Lola said this earlier, like as people gravitate away from like true streetwear, as they age out of that, because at a certain point, like you grow up and you make more money and you look crazy if you're wearing like head to toe splattered, nylon or whatever it may be. Says the guy in the sweater. But listen, it's just really it's really important that those categories and like those mentalities of what the customer is looking for are addressed. And I think that again, like that Fear of God moment was like an epiphany moment for the customers of both sides of the equation, saying like, oh, wait a minute, there is a middle ground here. And for me, that was a really exciting moment personally.
Yeah, I think just to add to what I said before and what Josh was saying, I think it sort of made, well, maybe not that particular collaboration, but certainly at that time, it sort of was making wearing jersey acceptable, outside the home. We all were wearing it at home during lockdown, but like, I think sort of coming out of that now, it's kind of normal now to be able to wear jersey mixed with more kind of sophisticated woven product. And I think that's sort of the new change in a way. It's sort of, it's a huge sort of shift from the conventions of the suit, but in a way that kind of, this monochrome dressing where, maybe your jersey is matching your cashmere is kind of the new version of that, if you like.
From what sort of perspective I got from the people sort of on the ground in these brands, I feel like a lot of them were in crisis sort of just before that collab. The Zegnas, the Ferragamos were sort of, they still been doing the sort of same tailoring. They tried to modernize a bit, but not really revolutionize what they were doing. And I think there was a lot of sort of envy towards the new guards, the sort of the Virgil Abloh's Off-White, which was based in Milan, if it wasn't showing there. Same with Alix and all the other brands that were sort of around and coming up and sort of overtaking these huge heritage houses who thought that they were sort of king of the hill from however many decades or centuries. So yeah, I think that was a sort of eruption point as well that was driving that change.
Yeah, you bring up such an interesting point, which is like, I think there's an assumption that the narrative is there was streetwear happening way over here, and there was, like in the United States and London, and there was Italian traditional, tailoring happening over here. But in fact, like New Guards Group and Slam Jam, which are these hugely influential streetwear businesses, were based in Italy. I mean, I'd be curious, like, why do you guys think that those for example, New Guards Group decided to base itself out of Italy, other than the fact that its founder, is Italian? But that seems like an important point. Like, was there another kind of influence that maybe those businesses had in addition to sort of scaring their potential competitors?
Made in Italy was important to them too. If you think about going back to like the very, very early days of hip hop culture, made in Italy mattered. Dapper Dan up in Harlem was deconstructing Fendi and Gucci bags to make suits out of. So, even then it was seen as a luxurious, aspirational thing to have your clothes made in Italy. And, as Daniel was saying earlier, working with Italian mills, working with Italian manufacturers, they can finesse things. Like there's like this extra level of like romance and sort of just like, perfect imperfection, whatever you want to call it, like just this personality that gets inflected into the clothes. And I think that, Slam Jam, New Guards Group, both of them founders, very, very, very shrewd men who, really saw that there was an opportunity to take, the principles, and obviously the designers that they work with as well, but, like be able to take the principles of this Italian manufacturing and apply it to something that would really, resonate with a new audience, but still having that made in Italy cachet to it. And, there's proof to it. There's proof in that pudding. It's not just, it's really true. Working with Italian manufacturing is a very different experience than many other places where you can make clothes.
You also have to remember the sort of infrastructure and the systems are in place there. The factories are all in Italy. They've got all the staff with the skills. It's really hard to actually train people up to that level of skill. And it's really hard to make clothes also when you're thousands of miles away from a factory. I'm working with a brand and they can visit a factory on any given day, and that really helps them to direct what exactly they want without having to think about shipping. You also have to think about the sort of, because the garment industry is such a backbone to the Italian economy, or it's so important at least, they also get supported by the government. They do get sort of they're saying regulations and in financial support as well. It really kind of amounts up to supporting them.
Yeah, I mean, that's such a I think an important element when we're talking about, as we started with this kind of like romance of Italian craftsmanship and manufacturing, it's borne out in the realities of Italy's economy. It's not merely sort of a romantic thing. It's actually, as you're saying, it's the backbone in many ways of the country. Do you guys feel like Italy will be like the king of menswear forever?
I mean, I think we could say, when I don't know how important where something is manufactured to people as it used to be, but I think, as Kimberley was saying earlier, when it comes to that idea of the storytelling, being able to talk about, the details, Italy, I mean, when you think about the places where people manufacture clothes on a large scale and the places where people are obsessed with where clothes are made, I mean, England certainly has that tradition, Savile Row, and, you know, leather making, shoe making. You know, obviously the tailored clothing industry has a home there. Japan for, you know, technical fabrics and, you know, like the craftsmanship that they imbue into what they do, which is very different feeling, although equally valid to Italians. But then, you know, then it's Italy. I mean, sure, France, sure, North America, you know, some stuff, you know, made in USA is important to a lot of people, but I don't see anybody dethroning Italy for a lot of the reasons that, you know, that were just described. I mean, it is supported by the government. It is one of the top 4 industries in the country. You know, so it's, you know, the only thing that I would say is that sometimes I've encountered specifically with smaller independent manufacturers, that there was a time when a younger generation of Italians didn't want to get involved with the family businesses. There was a brain drain. You know, they went in to try to be doctors, they tried to be lawyers, and then they found out that after they had gotten their degrees, there were no jobs for that, and then they did come back. But the apprenticeships were taken by Japanese people, by Chinese people, by people from Northern Europe, so that those crafts weren't lost, but, you know, it did add a different dimension to what made in Italy actually means.
Mm-hmm.
I think what I've been speaking to a few manufacturers in Italy, and it is actually struggling at the moment. And I think that's really sad that they have such a wealth of knowledge, and they're usually like the market leaders in like Milan Unica, Primo Vision. They're the ones that are coming with their inventive fabrics. They've spent all this money on research and development to go and showcase the finest jacquard weaves that they can make, or the best yarns that they can make. And it's almost like they're coming out to these trade shows with all these ideas, and then the next season everyone else is copying it. But they don't get, but the Italian ones aren't the ones that are chosen to make it, which is so sad. It's a tough world out there at the moment, from what I've been discussing with.
I think that comes down a little bit to what we said about the Italian finesse, you know, where they can just put the right level of puckering on the shoulder, that, you know, it just feels like it has that special hand feel to it, that sort of artisanal touch that you get in Savile Row, but really nowhere else in terms of their craftsmanship. And I think, you know, the Italians, you know, Zegna actually bought quite a lot of British looms back in the day, you know, and I think Italians have very much cherished this idea of like the craft and the creation, and they've really heralded that always. And I think, yes, we get now, and obviously Italy and the UK is huge competition from India or from China or from other regions in terms of fabric manufacturing, but also garment manufacturing. But I just think when we talk about luxury, it really, they are the leaders and will remain to be.
It's interesting what Brexit has also done to that situation as well. There's sort of, in a way, it's weakened what Britain has to offer now. And I know a brand that sort of, or several brands that used to distribute from England that now are looking at Italy as being next to their factories, and they can send to anywhere in the EU without any customs. The shipping is usually over land, so it's cheaper as well. So I think there is a sort of a light there. But in terms of the craftsmanship, it's also interesting to notice that a lot of the fashion in the last few years, maybe pre-COVID, was based on images, very flat images. And you can't really see those puckerings, those small details, those things about movement. You can't see movement in an image unless it's really well photographed. So yeah, that's hurt Italy. But I think this sort of move into makers, there's so many people on YouTube and on TikTok that are creating clothing, or they're creating anything crafty, and there's people watching them just to sort of see the process, and they're fascinated by it all. I think there's a big opportunity for them there. So sort of there's TikTokers that I know, that Simon Goldman and Adam Small, and Studio Benedictine, and also in Australia, all across the world, that are making clothes and captivating people with how to make it. Even, I don't know if you've seen that guy who makes sort of those feathers that are animated by machines. People are really fascinated by that. And I think, yeah, Italian tailoring really should tap into that and open the doors to their factories and let us have a look in, maybe. I don't know what they're hiding there, maybe. That might be an issue. But yeah, I think there's a huge opportunity there for them.
It's behind the curtain that's that Josh is sitting in front of all of the secrets of Italian manufacturing.
Right back here. I got told him to turn off all the sewing machines.
Yeah, it's like, before all of our sort of plans were changed due to COVID for this season, it really did feel like people were really talking about Milan as being the sort of energy center this season for men's fashion. With Alix showing there and Jonathan Anderson choosing to show his, eponymous brand there. Also, Samuel Ross's from A Cold Wall is technically on the schedule there, which was interesting because, Paris has become more and more fantastical and conceptual and experimental, which has always been its reputation. But the fact that there was this kind of like energy and excitement around Milan, I thought was notable. I guess we just have like a few more minutes. I'd love to hear did anyone have thoughts about the Alix show? I mean, that's another designer who, is obviously from the United States, but chose to make and base his brand in Italy, and perhaps speaks to that. Again, is like trying to do that sort of merging of sportswear and Italian craftsmanship that we've been talking about so much here.
I mean, Matthew kind of comes at it from the other direction, right? Like he comes at it from that sportswear, like gothy leather, technical motorcycle, like all those kinds of references that he has in his clothes, and then went towards tailored clothing over the course of the last couple of seasons. Now, this one felt a little bit more, again, gorpcore, outdoorsy with the big puffers and, like those new rain boots that he was doing. My favorite look was the puffer with the like the box knit back on it. I thought that was a pretty clever piece that sort of bridged the gap between the two. But yeah, I mean, all these people showing in Milan, I think that, there was a period where there was a big lull in Milan, like after, Lee McQueen died and stopped showing here. It was really just the big houses, be it, Etro and Dolce & Gabbana, Giorgio Armani. And then they had that moment where they tried to bring in younger talent to, show at the same venues like Suni and, like other brands like that. It didn't really take, Paris really stole a lot of the oxygen for a long time there. So I was excited to see, some of these sort of internationally interesting names, if not like household names yet, showing here. I thought that it was great. And obviously Matthew Williams partnered with Slam Jam to start his brand. So it made sense, JW, not sure exactly what the connection is there, although lots of his clothes are made in Italy. And, so it is what it is, and I think that a lot of people are looking towards June as being like, okay, we're really going to get it started, knock on wood, that we'll be able to. But I just think just in general, I mean, Alix was it's another sort of iteration of what he'd been doing, and good colors, great fabrics. So, interesting to me.
It's interesting to see the sort of different approach. I think with Alix is Zegna comes from a point of having this craftsmanship and then trying to apply a sort of cultural relevance to it, whereas Alix is very much grounded in this sort of cultural relevance. The sort of headlines from last night was that Lancey Fu was backstage and walking the show, and then that there was a Margiela reference. It's supported then by this amazing craftsmanship that comes from Italy, but it's not the leading point. It's not the selling point, maybe for the audience or for the customer. I wonder whether sort of that's a contrast as to why they're seeing various degrees of success.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. I mean, I'm always very intrigued to hear about like the younger customers who are joining this sort of subculture of tailoring, especially in London. That's like one of my sort of something I spend a lot of time looking at on Instagram in my downtime. Does anyone have any final like spicy scorched earth opinions that they'd like to share at the end of this panel before we sign off? Okay, wow. We're going to remain non-controversial. Sorry?
There's nothing to scorch, it's listen, I think that the clothes looked great. I mean, obviously you can tell a lot of care went into making them, but nothing here is earth shattering. You know, this is the way things have been progressing for a while, and they were both great examples of the mood of clothing right now. But you know, uncertain times, we got enough controversy going on in our lives. Let's have just some nice clothes to look at. That's the way I look at it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I know.
Sorry,
Sorry,
just
go
to
ahead.
add to, I just think people will look at this and they'll find loads of things they want to wear, and I think that's what's key. It just feels like it's right, sort of hitting on the money in terms of what men want right now.
I agree, like comfortable trousers, there is that step away from a jogger, but you've got those beautiful flannels, those high-waisted cuts that are going to be comfortable. You could get them like one size too big, and then you can have a big dinner in it while you sat on your Zoom, and it's all going to be okay. And the flannels almost feel like a jogger, so they're still soft on your skin, they're still comfortable. You've got those beautiful loose legs. So I think it's a great stepping stone away from working indoors to being a bit more glam on the outside when we do step outside.
Yeah, my sort of hot take closing remark, I guess, is, are people going to look at this? Is there anything there really that's going to really capture people's attention? And I'm talking sort of outside the sort of fashion bubble that we'll look at every show. You have to really think about how do you grab their attention? And I feel like they're trying their best and they're improving, but they're really not reaching that point quite yet, which, yeah, I'd like to see in the future.
Cool. Well, thank you guys so much for joining me. And thank you to all of the panelists and our studio audience. Thank you all for watching. So for more extensive Fashion Week coverage, be sure to visit showstudio.com. And if you're watching via Show Studio's YouTube, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe below, and we will see you next time.